The return was faster than the outward journey. Pip knew the terrain, Rowan knew the pace, and neither of them needed to stop for the discoveries that had slowed the first crossing. The lowland landscape was familiar now, the dim light a navigational constant rather than an alien wonder. The staircase caps that had pointed them toward Meridian on the way in sat at their backs now, and they walked away from the wet west into the drier ground that climbed toward the ridges. The safe water sources were marked in Rowan's memory, and Pip's, and they stopped only when the body required it. On the first evening, sheltered in the concrete ruins of a before building whose original purpose was lost to colonization by growth, Rowan told Pip what he had seen above the clouds. He told it badly. The words came in the wrong order, and the descriptions fell short, and the scale of the thing defeated every attempt to convey it through language. The sun was bright, the sky was blue, the flums were large, each sentence accurate and each one dimensionally wrong. Pip listened without interrupting. This was unusual enough that Rowan stopped twice to check that she was still awake. She was. She sat with her knees drawn up and her arms wrapped around them, her restless fingers still, her eyes on his face with an attention she normally reserved for trade negotiations and trail landmarks. When he finished, she was quiet for 10 seconds. Then she asked questions. "How big?" Pip asked. "The largest was perhaps 60 meters, Rowan said. Translucent. You could see through them." "How many?" Pip asked. 3 while I was observing," Rowan said. "Marcus estimates the total population at hundreds, possibly thousands, spread across the cloud layer globally." Pip absorbed this. "Do they come down?" she asked. "Not below the cloud layer," Rowan said. "As far as anyone has observed, they remain above or within the clouds at all times." "So nobody on the ground will ever see them," Pip said. "No," Rowan said, "only what they produce, the chorus, and the clearing." Pip looked up at the ceiling of their shelter, at the concrete that stood between her and the clouds that stood between her and the creatures she would never see. "I've heard the chorus my whole life," she said. "Every night, in the deep gray. I thought it was the most beautiful sound in the world, and I had no idea what was making it." Her fingers found the strap of her bag and worked it slowly. "That's a strange thing. Loving a sound for years and then finding out it comes from something you can't imagine." "I can describe them further," Rowan said. "Yeah, you will. Every time we meet, you'll describe them a bit more, and I'll build a picture, and it still won't be right, because I haven't seen them." She said it without bitterness. It was a fact, delivered with the same flatness Rowan's mother used for before information. But that's fine. That's how most knowledge works in the dim. Somebody sees something and tells somebody else, and the telling is never as good as the seeing, but it's better than nothing. They met the travelers in the middle of the second day. There were 3 of them, coming the other way on the narrow track, and Rowan heard them before he saw them, the particular sound of people moving slower than they wanted to. A man and a woman, both younger than the pair Rowan and Pip had passed near Meridian, and between them a child. The woman carried the child, and the child was perhaps 6, and the child was not walking because the child could not. The small head rested against the woman's shoulder, the face slack with the kind of sleep that is not rest, the skin hot enough that Rowan could see the flush on the cheeks from 3 paces away. Pip stopped on the path. "You're a long way from anywhere," she said. "We're going to Meridian," the man said. "There's a doctor." "There's a doctor," Pip agreed. She did not say the rest of it, the part about whether the doctor still had what they needed, and Rowan understood that she had decided in the half-second before she spoke not to put that on them when they had 2 more days of walking ahead. The woman shifted the child's weight. "How far?" 2 days if you keep moving," Pip said. "More with the little one slowing you. Stay on this track until it forks at the dog-shaped rock, then west, and the staircase caps will point you the rest of the way." She crouched, opened her bag, and pressed a sealed twist of dried ghost caps into the man's hand without being asked. "Eat these. Not anything red, not anything that pulses faster than you breathe. There's clean water at the creek behind you, the moving part, not the pools. Rowan looked at the child. The fever, the stillness, the way the small body had stopped fighting to be carried and simply hung. He had read the encyclopedia's pages on childhood fevers, on how fast they moved in small bodies, on how little margin there was. He did the arithmetic he could not stop himself from doing. Okoye had held 3 courses, and he had taken one. The pair near Meridian had been ahead of these 3 on the same road, and there might be others he had not seen, and the shelf might hold 2 courses, or 1, or none, by the time this woman carried this child through the east gate. He had no way to know. The medicine for his own mother sat against his chest, wrapped and dry and accounted for, and he kept it there, and he said none of this. The doctor trades for work and for goods, Rowan said instead. Offer the work first. If you have nothing to offer, tell her your child's symptoms in the order they came, and tell her exactly, because she decides by what she hears. The woman looked at him, and something in her face sharpened, the recognition of a person giving her real information instead of comfort. You've seen her. I have. She is fair. It was the truest thing he could give them, and it was not nothing, and it was not enough. They went on toward Meridian, the man's hand closing around the twist of food, the woman's stride careful under the weight she carried. Rowan watched them out of sight before he started walking again. Pip fell in beside him and did not fill the quiet for a while, which was its own kind of comment. You wanted to give them the course in your coat, Pip said eventually, not an accusation. An observation, the way she observed everything. For a moment, Rowan said. And then you did the math. My mother coughed blood for 3 weeks before I left. That child has 2 days of walking and a doctor at the end of it. He kept his eyes on the path. It is not a clean answer. There is no clean answer. There is 1 course of medicine for every person who needs 3. Pip did not say otherwise, and they walked. The chorus came up loud that afternoon, louder than Rowan had heard it at ground level, the harmonics amplified by the narrow walls of stone and coated cliff faces until the air vibrated at frequencies he could feel in his teeth. He listened with new ears. The sound was not a single event. It was layers, each one distinct if you knew how to separate them, the way his mother could separate the ingredients in a broth by taste alone. He picked out a shift in the lower harmonics, a thickening of the bass tones that followed a rhythm he could almost anticipate, and then an answering shift from another direction, higher, the 2 patterns overlapping in a way that suggested, if his textbook's marine analogy held, 2 flums calling their feeding back and forth across the cloud. He could not be certain. He had no instruments and no reference but his own ears. But attention was the first instrument, and he had that. The skin on his face was still tight from the sun. 90 minutes of direct exposure after a lifetime of filtered light, and his skin had registered the difference in a way that would last for days. A physical record of where he had been, written on his body where the clouds had not reached. He pulled out his notebook. The bound hand could not hold it open, so he wedged it against his knee and wrote with the right, slower than usual, the letters cramped. Time, location, the direction of the 2 sources, the frequency observations described in the imprecise language of someone without instruments but with attention and a pencil. The entry joined the column of light window measurements that filled the preceding pages, the 2 records running parallel above, the creatures below, the light they were slowly returning. Pip watched him write. You're becoming Marcus, she said. I am becoming someone who writes things down, Rowan said. Marcus writes things down about the sky. I write things down about the light. The activity is the same, but the subject differs. The activity is obsession. I've seen it in both of you. You get that look like the rest of the world has gone quiet, and only the thing you're measuring is real. She said it with affection, not accusation. My ma had it too, for trading. She'd get that look when she was calculating a deal, like the numbers were the only language that mattered. They walked in silence after that, the chorus filling the valley, Rowan noting its shifts and its silences in a notebook that was filling faster than he knew how to interpret. On the evening of the second day, Pip asked the question. They were sitting at the edge of a creek, refilling their flasks, the water running clear over smooth stones that glowed faintly with the light of aquatic species. The dim was deep, the canopy thick, and the world reduced to the small circle of light their surroundings provided. "Why do you live alone on a mountain?" Pip asked. "When there are places like Meridian, when there are people." Rowan considered the question. He had answered it before, internally, many times, and the answer had always been sufficient: safety, self-reliance, his mother, the farm, and the routine that kept them alive. "My father chose the mountain because it had a light well, and it was defensible, and it was away from the collapse," Rowan said. "The first years were bad. My mother has told me enough for me to understand that. People fought over resources, over light wells, over food. The mountain was safe because nobody else wanted it. Too small, too isolated, too much work for too little yield. My parents built the farm because it was the best option among poor options. My mother stayed because she had nowhere else to go, and because by then the farm was working, and leaving meant starting over. I stayed because I was born there, and it was home, and the farm needed me, and I did not know there was anything else." The words sounded different spoken aloud than they did in his head, thinner. The reasons were true, but they were not all of the truth. "Those are reasons," Pip said. "They're good reasons. But they're not all of the reasons." Rowan looked at the creek. The water moved over the stones with a sound that was not unlike the lowest register of the chorus, a continuous flow with internal variations. "I am comfortable with what I know," he said. "The mountain is predictable. The farm operates on principles I understand. When something breaks, I fix it, and when something grows, I harvest it. The variables are limited, and the outcomes are manageable. Meridian has 1,000 variables and outcomes I cannot predict, and every one of them involves another person's decisions." "That's a longer way of saying you're afraid of people," Pip said. "I am not afraid of people," Rowan said. "You're afraid of needing people," Pip said. "That's the same thing, just quieter." Rowan did not answer. He looked at the creek and let the words stand, because there was no honest way to knock them down. He had needed his mother, and he had needed no one else, by arrangement, by design, because needing was a variable, and he did not keep variables he could not close off. But he had spent the past weeks needing Pip to read the terrain, and Marcus to explain the sky, and Okoye to part with what she could not spare. And every one of those needs had been a thing he could not control, and he had survived all of them. That did not make the discomfort smaller, it made it worse, because now he knew the cost was survivable, and he no longer had the excuse that it was not. "That is closer to it," he said finally. Pip glanced at him, surprised, as though she had not expected to be agreed with. She capped her flask and stood. "My mother used to say the dim is only lonely if you let it be." She looked at the valley, the canopy overhead, the gray sky above it. "Then she left, and I found out she was wrong." They walked the remaining hour to the trail junction without speaking. The silence was not uncomfortable, but it was not empty either. It carried the child, and the woman, and Pip's mother who had walked north and not come back, and the arithmetic that had no clean answer. The junction was a place where the path split at a large boulder marked with cairns. East continued toward the mountain ridges. North angled upward into terrain. Pip knew, and Rowan did not. Pip stopped. She adjusted her pack, tightened a strap, then tilted her head back to find the light through the canopy gap, reading its angle, the way she read everything in the dim, to know which way was which and how much of the day was left. Rowan watched her do it. He had crossed 3 days of this country by following that same skill in her, and he was only now learning to do a cruder version of it himself, on paper, with numbers, after the fact. Then she turned to him and dug into her bag, the contents clinking, and came up with a small coil of copper wire, the same kind she had cut for the gate signal at the start of all this. She pressed it into his good hand. For the flashlight, when the spring retainer slips again, Pip said, it will. And you'll want a shim and not have one, and you'll think of me, which is the real reason I'm giving it to you. That is a generous interpretation of your own motives, Rowan said. I'm a generous person. Ask anyone. She closed his fingers around the wire. If you come back to Meridian, bring flashlight parts, which always sell, and bring that notebook. Marcus will want to see your chorus data. I will keep that in mind, Rowan said. And Pip grinned, fast and crooked, the same grin she had worn in the school cafeteria when they first met. You say that a lot. I will keep that in mind. It is your way of saying yes without committing, and I have figured that out. Then you have learned something on this journey, Rowan said. I've learned several things. Gears, springs, bearing housings, and the fact that mountain folk can be funny when they're not trying. She turned north, took 3 steps, and raised her hand without looking back, a wave directed at the trail ahead rather than the person behind. Rowan watched her walk. Her pace was quick, her stride efficient, her layers of scavenged clothing shifting and rustling with each step. She rounded a bend in the trail. The growth closed behind her, and she was gone. The dim absorbed her the way it absorbed everything, completely, quietly, without announcement. He was alone, the familiar state he had lived in his whole life, interrupted by the company of the past weeks. He put the coil of wire into the front pocket of his pack, working the drawstring one-handed because the other would not pull it tight, and the small clumsiness of it told him something the quiet had not. He had come down this mountain doing every task with 2 good hands and a mind that ran ahead to the next chore. He was going back up slower, favoring a hand the sky had cost him, carrying 2 books and another man's data and a length of wire he did not need and would keep anyway. Somewhere behind him a woman was carrying a child toward a shelf that might already be bare. The solitude still fitting the way a coat does after a hard season, looser in some places and tighter in others. Rowan turned east. The pack settled against his spine, the 2 books thudding softly against each other as he adjusted the straps, and his legs found the uphill rhythm they had kept for thousands of crossings before this one. His mind was somewhere above the clouds and on a track behind him.
Chapter Guild, Stories for Your Mind.